Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post. I am Ghadi Francis. This is our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates, stories and news from one of the most volatile regions in the world, the one that I call my home, West Asia. Well, this week the episode is packed with stories from tensions in the West Bank to the Haj Pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia. But first, let's take a look at what's making the headlines in the region. Iran will not beg in nuclear deal talks, says the country's president Ibrahim Raisi. Raisi goes on to describe the US and Israel as enemies, but does not see Saudi Arabia as one. Emirati President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan meets Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian in Abu Dhabi. The meeting marks the latest signal of improving Arab-Iran ties. Qatar PM Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani meets Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Big focus on a long-term strategic partnership in the energy sector. Turkey's central bank nearly doubles its main interest rate to 15%. The move is seen as President Erdogan signaling a shift toward more conventional economic policies to counter sky-high inflation. Starting with Palestine, our top story is about the recent tensions in the West Bank. Once again, the tensions have flared in the region. Now this time what started it and triggered it were Israeli raids on the Jenin camp. 3 days of clashes marked one of the deadliest in the recent years. Here's the story.
And this was round 3 of deadly violence and mayhem in what goes down as a week of the fiercest Israel-Palestine clashes in years. Hundreds of Israeli settlers raided Turmus Aya town north of Ramallah in the West Bank on Wednesday. Many were armed, out to kill. A report said at least 30 houses and 40 cars were torched.
Dozens of settlers came here, around 250 settlers. They tried to enter the courtyard. They set the cars on fire. They started shooting towards the house, using live bullets and stones, and they damaged the balconies.
Local residents say Israeli soldiers moved in soon afterwards. Live shots were fired, some by men in Israeli military uniforms, some by Israeli settlers. Hours later, an Israeli drone targeted a car, killing 3. The settler attack reinforced questions from rights groups who accused the military of cozying up to the settlers. International legal obligations to protect civilians, they say, are set aside. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stepped in, saying Israeli citizens must respect the law, though he justified what many claimed as police lawlessness.
There are days when you have to say the obvious. The state of Israel is a state of law. The citizens of Israel are all obligated to respect the law. We will not accept riots either in the Golan Heights or in Judea and Samaria. I fully back the Israel police and security forces in their activity to maintain law and order. We will not accept any calls against the police and the security forces in these places and any other place. We are a country of law.
The Turmus Aya onslaught came as reprisal for the killing of Israeli settlers a day earlier. Outside the Eli settlement, 4 settlers were killed by alleged Hamas militants at a restaurant and petrol station. The funeral of one of them, Nahman Morodov, is said to have inflamed passions. Allegedly fanned further by Israel's national security minister calling for a military operation and fierce action by Israel against Palestinians.
The time has come for a military operation in Judea and Samaria. Yes, to return to the targeted assassinations from the air, take down buildings, put up barriers, expel terrorists, and pass death penalty law for terrorists in second and third reading.
The Eli attack too was born out of a call for revenge. On June 19, Israeli military forces had raided a refugee camp in Jenin area. Army helicopter gunships were used, a first in years, to launch missiles and release flares. Live fire, tear gas and stun grenades were deployed. The death toll of Palestinians here rose to 7. 2 of the dead were teens. More than 90 were wounded, 23 of them critically.
I believe those numbers are going up as we speak. Such escalations threaten to plunge the region deeper into a deadly crisis. Mr. Venesland said that all sides must refrain from actions that would further escalate the situation and take steps to re-engage on a political path.
Among the many dimensions of the Israel-Palestine issue, a leading one is Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government, now tabling plans to approve over 4,000 building permits in the West Bank, has given it fresh fuel. It comes despite Washington's pressure against the move, despite the United Nations viewing it as a huge obstacle to peace.
Tor Venesland, the special coordinator for the Middle East peace process, today said that he was deeply concerned by the Israeli government's decision yesterday to alter settlement planning procedures that have been in place since 1996, which is expected to expedite settlement expansion. He is also alarmed by the anticipated advancement next week of over 4,000 settlement housing units by Israeli planning authorities.
The last week in the West Bank has seen one of the worst spasms of violence. Frequent raids have resulted in heavy casualties. The Tormuz Aya onslaught evoked memories of a mass settler attack in February near Nablus. 174 Palestinians have been killed in 2023 alone. On the Israeli side, at least 24 are dead.
Hopes of returning home dwindle for Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Now hundreds are still living in camps in East Bekaa Valley. For those, the situation has turned somehow existential as their host country loses patience and international support dwindles. Here's the report.
Located in eastern Lebanon, Bekaa Valley has been a home for Syrian refugees for years. But now the country's worsening economic crisis is casting a shadow on their makeshift tents. With anti-Syria sentiment running high in the country, the government is calling for refugees to leave the country. The crackdown has already begun, with many deported to Syria this year. With no place to call home, not enough food on their plates, and no hope for future, conditions for refugees are worsening by the day. Ibrahim Al-Karbo fled his home in Raqqa after the Islamic State took over the Syrian city and established it as a de facto capital.
I haven't left home in more than 2 years because I'm scared of the checkpoints, that they will stop me at a checkpoint, take me, send me somewhere, and leave my children behind. I would rather die. If someone comes to get me here, I would rather die in front of my children. At least they will know for sure that I'm dead, rather than keep searching for me.
Korbo and his 6 children now survive on a meager income doing menial jobs. His sister lost her 12-year-old son in a tractor accident. The boy had played a key part in getting food on the table. To add to their miseries, fear of deportation is what dictates their life now.
I feel like I will live out the rest of my life in this tent, voiceless. Returning to Syria is tough. I feel like I'm destined to stay in this tent. That's it. Unless they force us to leave and dump us somewhere. No one knows what's waiting for them.
But Korbo is just one among millions suffering a similar fate. Lebanon hosts 2 million Syrians, with more than 800,000 registered at the UN. This is the highest number of refugees per capita in the world. fear and worry is all they know today.
You can't sleep in peace. I can't trust that my family will be safe, that my children will be safe. How can I go live there in Syria if they don't consider me human? How can I go live among people who don't consider me human?
These refugees don't wish to return to Syria, to a dire situation in a war-torn country. More than 500,000 people have been killed in Syria since the civil war started in 2011. According to the UN Refugee Agency, more than 14 million have fled their homes. The international community pledged $6.13 billion in Brussels for Syria and countries hosting Syrian refugees. But much more remains to be done to bring change in the lives of many Korbos living in Bekaa Valley and beyond. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
With much fanfare, Jordan welcomed their new royal couple this month. The 28-year-old crown prince got married in the event of the decade. But for Jordanians, it might not be that much of a pride. On one hand, there was the extravagant display of privilege, and on the other, there are the rising economic hardships for the common man. Here's a report.
Jordan's royal family expanded this month. The young 28-year-old crown prince married a Saudi architect. But the marital bond, supposed to symbolize the monarchy's modern future, a hope for the country's young, is playing out like a cruel joke. While the royal family wedding generated momentary excitement in Jordan, its luxurious setting and VIP guests also highlighted the vast gulf between the prince's life of privilege and the daily struggles of most Jordanians of his age. Jordan has a population of over 10 million people, 2/3 of which are under the age of 30. A young, dynamic group, one might hope. But in the dilapidated streets of the capital city's poorer districts and in the dusty villages of the countryside, there is little hope for change. Almost half of Jordan's youth today is unemployed. They grumble, but the majority never speaks out. Some dream of leaving the country in hopes of leading a better life. Those who do muster the courage are silenced before they can speak up. Just like other West Asian nations, the story of economic pressure and political repression is common in Jordan.
The situation is tragic. I am not alone. Everyone complains about poverty. If only there were jobs for young people to help them build their future. For those who did not complete their studies, for those who completed their studies as well. There are young people who studied and did not get a job.
Like many of its neighbors, Jordan's once bloated public sector has left the state with little to spend on health and education. On top of that, efforts to slow public hiring and cut subsidies have eroded the social contract that kept citizens compliant. Many blame corrupt officials, and increasingly the palace, for their misery. This is Jasser Al-Haraziz, 28-year-old and co-founder of an AI company, Robotna. He was educated at a public school, an experience Al-Haraziz describes as a disappointment. There were not enough teachers in his schools. The students wandered. His fate would have been the same had Al-Haraziz not got a scholarship that trained him in artificial intelligence. It struck him as absurd that Jordanian schools were teaching by rote, turning curious kids into disciplined subjects. At a time when technology is changing, he and some friends began developing a program to teach robotics in Jordan's failing public schools. Their company, called Robotna, now trains thousands of students nationwide.
If we do not develop in this field in Jordan, we will be one of the countries that will lose jobs in the future. in the field of programming and artificial intelligence. You know that artificial intelligence will eliminate jobs and programming will eliminate jobs. But at the same time, it will create new jobs. It will create jobs for developing countries who can adapt to the situation. But the countries that will lose jobs, such as developing countries and undeveloped in this field.
But their work is not easy. In a country with no bankruptcy law, failure can mean a prison sentence if debts are not paid. Jordanian tax authorities treat social enterprises as major corporations. Robotna loses nearly 40% of its revenue to taxes each year. Old-fashioned officials routinely block Al-Harasis and his colleagues from entering schools.
Iraqis in the southern city of Basra are struggling with extreme heat. In the recent days, temperatures have reached 47 degrees Celsius, and it is expected to rise up to 50 degrees in the coming 2 weeks. Now, how are these people coping with these extreme dry and heat conditions? Let's take a look.
Not the winter fog, not industrial smog. This is the summer sandstorm. A regular over Iraq cities at this time of the year. Particles in the air add to temperatures already in the 40s and 50s Celsius. In these conditions, imagine spending the day at work, outdoors. Basra city, 19th June. Day temperatures soar beyond the 50 Celsius mark. For construction workers, street vendors, traffic cops and others though, it has to be life as usual. With delirium arising out of fatigue almost commonplace.
Indeed, we get fatigue and fainting cases, and sometimes we have people falling down, and we take them to the hospital because the weather is extremely hot. Today, the temperature is about 50 degrees Celsius, and it is not helpful at all. But we don't have other choices except from working in this job.
With plenty of sarcasm thrown in on the weather, on erratic electricity supply, on the creaking infrastructure in the country, and more.
You know, Basra is cold today. The temperature is 46 degrees Celsius, so the car couldn't take it. Humans can't bear this weather, so imagine a car which is all iron. The temperature gauge is up and it is over the half maximum temperature. So what would you expect? It can't take it, and despite the presence of a cooling system in the car, it can't cope with it.
Experts warn of sandstorms becoming more frequent. Winds becoming dustier and temperatures rising sharply in years to come. Made worse by factors like scarce rains due to climate change and a lack of vegetation in most parts of the country. Iraq has taken the mantle as among the top 5 nations worst hit by climate change, including drought. As more and more farmers flee the countryside, abandoned land worsens. Then the other option, letting go.
Today the temperature is very high in Basra Governorate and the electricity is off. I mean, it is always being cut off from 1 hour to another. So we came here with the boys from the neighborhood to swim in the river. We cool down, enjoy and play, then we go back home.
Finally, here's to celebrating the summer heat, no matter how vicious. Beyond Iraq's climate and economy and infrastructure troubles, childhood finds a way of making the most of the present. Let the pains be gone.
Muslim believers from across the world gather in Saudi Arabia for the holy season of Hajj. It is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, where those financially and physically able are required to visit Saudi Arabia to perform Hajj at least once in their lifetime. Here's the full story.
Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims are pouring into Saudi Arabia for the Hajj pilgrimage. It is the first full-fledged Hajj to be held since COVID-19 restrictions were fully lifted in the kingdom. Hajj officially begins on the evening of the 26th of June and continues till the evening of the 1st of July. In 2022, Saudi Arabia had announced that up to 1 million pilgrims, mostly from abroad, had attended the Hajj season after 2 years of disruption due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This was down from some 2.6 million pilgrims who visited Mecca and Medina for Hajj in 2019. Muslim faithful leave for the Hajj pilgrimage from Sana'a airport in Yemen. Prominent Houthi ministers are among them. It's the first of Hajj trip from Yemen since the war broke out here in 2015. That's 8 years ago. From Jeddah in Saudi, they travel to Mecca for the annual Islamic pilgrimage. Yemen Airways recently reached an understanding with Saudi Arabia to operate 4 flights during Hajj season from Houthi-controlled Sana'a to Jeddah. Talks to end the conflict in Yemen have progressed since a China brokered deal in March this year to end a diplomatic rift. A Saudi delegation visited Sana'a in April for peace talks with the Houthi group. Iran reopened its embassy in Saudi Arabia earlier this month. Israel has said that there would be no direct flights to Saudi Arabia this year for the Hajj pilgrimage. Tel Aviv also played down any prospects of US-mediated normalization of relations with Riyadh. Saudi Arabia had given quiet assent to UAE and Bahrain forging ties with Israel in 2020. But it had held off itself, saying Palestinian statehood goals should be addressed first. In a clear expression of its stand, Riyadh did not offer to let members of Israel's 18% Muslim minority flying in directly for this year's Hajj. The Biden administration has viewed launching direct flights as a step towards reaching a normalization agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you always the most recent updates, news and stories from one of the most volatile regions in the world. Until then, stay safe. I am Ghadi signing off from Lebanon. And you're watching WION World is One.